Coming up today, Korea and Japan are set to hold working-level talks to follow up on last year's landmark agreement on the issue of Japan's wartime sexual enslavement of Korean women. Korea reports its first case of the Zika virus. The patient, a man in his 40s, had recently returned home from a trip to Brazil. First meeting his Cuban counterpart in Havana, U.S. President Barack Obama says the U.S. trade embargo against Cuba will end. Stay tuned for these stories and more. Hello, it's noon on Tuesday, the 22nd of March. You're tuned in to our midday newscast here on Arirang TV. Thank you for joining us. I'm Mark Broom. We start this afternoon with the official opening of a massive creative economy startup campus in Korea's main IT hub, the town of Park Geunhye, just south of Seoul. The three-building complex will function as a base camp not only for Korean startups, but for those launched elsewhere in Asia as well. President Park Geunhye was there this morning to give a congratulatory speech. We're going to connect to our presidential office correspondent Song Ji-sun at the presidential office of Cheongwade. So Ji-sun, this opening should give Korea's creative economy drive some extra momentum to expand overseas.
You're right, Mark. Marking the opening of the huge startup support center, President Park started off by mentioning the Baduk or Go match between Lee Se-dor and artificial intelligence AlphaGo that ended last week, in which the Google-developed program won 4-1. She said with the advent of the fourth industrial revolution, Korea must come up with creative ideas and innovative products to survive, as her administration has pushed for the past 3 years, with a national chain of 17 innovation centers in full swing now. Housing over 200 startups, the Pangu campus will cater specifically to tech companies in the fields of Internet of Things, cloud computing, big data, and mobile, and with further facilities for international exchanges to be built later on. A creative economy valley will be complete by next year.
스타트업 캠퍼스가 우리 창업 기업과 세계 시장을 연결하는 관문이 되기를 바랍니다. 우리나라의 우수한 스타트업 생태계를 국제사회에 알리고 해외 투자자를 연결하는 든든한 가교 역할을 해주기를 바랍니다.
And in addition to helping domestic startups expand overseas, the campus will also attract prospective foreign startups through a competition later this year. President Park pledged full support for fostering a new center as Asia's startup hub, where all talented youth from abroad can gather to realize their dreams of launching innovative startups. Back to you, Mark.
Thank you, Ji-sun. Now, South Korea and Japan are set to hold working-level talks in Tokyo this Tuesday, the first meeting since last year's landmark agreement on the issue of Japan's wartime sexual enslavement of Korean women. Our Foreign Affairs correspondent Gwon-swa reports.
When South Korea and Japan convened for working-level talks in Tokyo on Tuesday, it'll be their first meeting since they came to an agreement on the so-called Comfort Women issue last year. According to Seoul's foreign ministry, in their 13th round of talks, the two sides are to discuss follow-up measures on the December 28th deal on Japan's wartime sexual enslavement of Korean women before and during World War II. The meeting will be led by the foreign ministry's newly appointed Director General for Northeast Asian Affairs Chung Byung-won and his Japanese counterpart Kimihiro Ishikane. One of the main topics expected to be discussed is the creation of a foundation through which the Japanese government will compensate the Korean victims with an endowment of 1 billion yen or $8.9 million. The bilateral meeting kicked off almost 2 years ago with the aim of healing the wounds of the past and recovering the honor and dignity of the victims, of which only 44 are alive today. Gwon-swa, Arirang News.
Now, representatives of the Sixparty nuclear talks from South Korea and the United States will continue their talks in Seoul on Tuesday afternoon to discuss the implementation of sanctions on North Korea. South Korea's Special Representative for Korean Peninsula Peace and Security Affairs, Kim Hong-gyun, and his U.S. counterpart Sung Kim will discuss comprehensive measures to denuclearize the North. This will include ways to ensure the heaviest UN Security Council resolution recently imposed on Pyongyang is strictly followed for maximum impact. The two sides are also expected to exchange views on ways to bring about cooperation from neighboring countries. Seoul and Washington held their first high-level talks on Monday in Seoul, where they solely focused on North Korea's sanctions. And staying with North Korea, the regime's main propaganda website has released a video showing South Korea's presidential office of Cheongwadae and President Park Geunhye in the crosshairs before they are both blown up. The 3-minute video released on Tuesday also shows the North blowing up the White House. It's the first time North Korea has released footage showing an attack on President Park. This, as Pyongyang reported that Kim Jong-un presided over the test firing of a new multiple rocket launcher. According to the state-run Korean Central News Agency on Tuesday, Kim expressed his satisfaction with the test and praised defense officials and technicians. He added that the launcher will boost the regime's ability to hit enemy targets in South Korea. The report said the launcher is ready for deployment. Now, South Korea has confirmed its first Zika infection in a man who was recently in Brazil. The health ministry, in a press briefing less than 1 hour ago, said that a 43-year-old man who recently returned from a business trip to the South American country tested positive for the virus at 6 a.m. this morning, local time. The man had been in Brazil for 22 days and came back to Korea about 10 days ago. Officials said he began showing symptoms of the disease, including fever, rash and muscle pain, 5 days after he returned, but is currently in stable condition. He has been quarantined at a hospital in Jeollanam-do province and will undergo another test this afternoon. Officials stress, however, that there's no need for panic, as the Zika virus is not airborne and the mortality rate is extremely low. US President Barack Obama and his Cuban counterpart Raul Castro held a historic meeting in the Cuban capital of Havana on Monday. The Cuban leader welcomed the American president, but as things went on, the two clashed over some of the long-standing disagreements between them. Kim Mo-kyun has more.
President Obama sat with Cuban President Raul Castro for a summit on the second day of his trip to Havana. During the talks, the first between the two countries in nearly 90 years, Obama and Castro shook hands and agreed to normalize relations. However, as Obama addressed Cuba's human rights issues and urged for its democratization, Castro responded sharply, saying that his country met all international rights agreements and that the state provides good health care and high access to education. Nevertheless, Obama stressed the importance and the role of the human rights issue in developing their relations.
One of the impediments to strengthening those ties is these disagreements around human rights and democracy. And to the extent that we can have a good conversation about that and to actually make progress, that I think will allow us to see the full flowering of a relationship that is possible. In the absence of that, I think it will continue to be a very powerful irritant.
In terms of business and trade between the two sides, Obama said much progress has been made and that they were actively negotiating on further opportunities. Regarding this, Castro demanded that the United States lift its 54-year-old trade embargo on the island and hand back the Guantanamo base.
The blockade is the most important obstacle for economic development and the well-being of the Cuban people. That is why removing it is essential for us to normalize bilateral relations. It will also be beneficial for Cuban migrants who want the best for their families and their country.
Obama replied by saying that the embargo is definitely going to end sometime and their agreement to improve ties will continue beyond his administration. On Tuesday, President Obama will give a speech to the Cuban people, meet some dissidents, and then attend a baseball game between the Tampa Bay Rays and the Cuban national team. Kim Mo-kyun, Arirang News.
Apple has unveiled its latest line of products, including the 4-inch iPhone SE and a smaller version of the iPad. The new iPhone returns to its smaller display, which looks similar to the iPhone 5S, but features the latest technologies such as Apple Pay and the company's fastest processor used in its iPhone 6 models. The 9.7-inch iPad Pro That features a new display system, improved speakers, and is compatible with the Apple Pencil. Apple also officially released its iOS 9.3 software called Care Kit, which can help patients and medical professionals use their phones in healthcare. Pre-orders for the new iPhone and iPad will begin on Thursday in selected countries. The Supreme Court in the United States has agreed to hear Samsung's appeal against the massive damages it was ordered to pay for infringing upon Apple's design patents. The court announced on Monday that it had accepted Samsung's petition to consider the case following a 2012 district court ruling that forced the Korean company to pay Apple $548 million in damages. If the court sides with Samsung, it could be able to get up to almost $400 million back off Apple. It marks the first design patents case the highest US court has taken up in 120 years. The court is expected to hear arguments and rule in the 9-month term that starts in October. Now, in health news, diabetics have to check their blood sugar levels at least once a day, and previous methods made this a painful and troublesome process. But Korean researchers have found an easier and more accurate way of doing it. EG1 has more.
This man in his 70s has been suffering from diabetes for 15 years. He used to monitor his blood sugar using a device that required him to prick his finger several times a day to get a reading. But he stopped doing it about 5 years ago because drawing his own blood made him uncomfortable.
I don't like seeing blood, and it also takes some time, making it a stressful process. So now I go to the hospital to have my blood checked.
But Korean researchers at the Institute for Basic Science have found a new method for measuring glucose levels. They've developed a nanopatch that can monitor a patient's blood sugar levels in real time. When the patch made of graphene is put on the body, it absorbs a certain amount of sweat, and a sensor measures the person's glucose level.
The patch also has a humidity and temperature sensor that increases the accuracy of the result. Furthermore, it also has hand tremor sensors that allow patients with low glucose levels to measure their sugar levels more easily.
In addition, the patch automatically dispenses treatment. If a patient's blood sugar level is too high, tiny drug-filled needles will be activated to inject the diabetes medicine metmorphin into the body. With the development, researchers hope it'll be easier for diabetics to monitor their blood sugar levels and prevent more severe conditions such as cardiovascular disease and stroke. 이지원, Arirang News.
Now, spring is in full bloom across most of southern Korea, where some of the country's biggest flower festivals opened over the last weekend, attracting thousands to admire the early blossoms. Our Oh Soo-young with the details.
Frail white petals tinged with pink. The plum blossoms cover the mountainous slopes of Jeollanam-do province, overlooking the Seomjin River. It's the very picture of spring, which appears to have come round early this year across the southern parts of Korea. Visitors from every corner of the peninsula are gathering here in Gwangyang at the Plum Blossom Festival to take in the sheer beauty of the landscape.
I came because it's the earliest flower festival this year. I'm glad I did because the flowers are so beautiful.
We've looked around and taken lots of photos. We've even had plum blossom ice cream.
My travel club members and I come every year to look at the flowers, enjoy their fragrance and the food. This year, the flowers are more vibrant, more beautiful.
And of course, no festival is quite complete without a spot of the local delicacies. You can sample a bit of spring fresh from the local farm, where the fruit of the plum blossom tree is squeezed and thickened into syrup. It has a sweet and slightly tangy taste, livening up almost any Korean snack or dish.
It works well with meat, making it tender and getting rid of the smell. It also goes into making sauces, rice snacks, pickles, and tea.
The Flower Festival is one of many others that opened over the weekend. The Gure Sansuyu Festival also kicked off in Jeollanam-do province, at the foothills of Mount Jiri. There, thousands of cornelian cherry or sansuyu trees are speckled with small yellow flowers. Breathing in the fresh mountain air, visitors can take a leisurely stroll exploring the small picturesque villages as they follow a trail along the creek. And a sip of sansuyu tea makes for the perfect refreshment.
The upper regions of the country still have yet to see the season in full bloom. But down here in the southernmost regions, it's time for flowers, food and festivity. Oh Soo-young, Arirang News, Gwangyang.
Well, that's all we have for now. I'm Mark Broom. Thank you as always for tuning in, and we'll be back throughout the day with more newscasts. Until then, goodbye.